Skol, baby! What a week. What a game for the Minnesota Vikings. As a proud Vikings fan, I feel great today. They beat up on the Green Bay Packers. It got close at the end, and people, especially Viking fans, will say that it was never a close game because it was in garbage time. But let me tell you something. As a Vikings fan, I was sweating. It was close, and it got close at the end. Too close for comfort. But ultimately, the Vikings sweep the Green Bay Packers this year. They beat them both times on the road and at home, and in similar ways where they got out to a big lead and then kind of gave up the lead there at the end to make us sweat it out a little bit. But ultimately, they get the win. And more importantly than beating the Green Bay Packers is that they solidify themselves the chance to play for the number one seed in the NFC. Can you believe it? Vikings fans, no one, including us, thought that that was possible at the beginning of the season. To give yourself the chance to play for something meaningful in Week 18, we would have thought we'd be lucky to be playing for a possible wild card playoff spot in Week 18. And no, here we are playing for possibly home field throughout the playoffs, which would be a huge advantage for the Vikings. As you see, they have a great home field advantage. It's hard for teams to come in there and play. The Vikings are 7-1 at home this season. So clearly a lot to play for. That game has been flexed out to Sunday Night Football. So it's going to be the last game of the regular season for all the marbles for the NFC North Division and for home field. And for the loser of that game, they drop down to the 5th seed and will be playing either at Atlanta or at Tampa. Just finished watching the Atlanta Falcons game, who lost to Washington. So now Tampa's in control of their own destiny. It looks like if they can take care of business next week, then whoever loses the Vikings-Lions game will start the playoffs on the road, more than likely in Tampa Bay against Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which can be frisky. They've already beaten the Lions. I feel like they always play the Lions kind of close. And they beat the Vikings last year as well. And obviously that's a different season, different quarterback for the Vikings and all that. But the Bucs could be frisky. As a Vikings fan, if I had to choose between playing the Falcons or the Bucs, I'd rather play the Falcons with Michael Penix, who's a rookie quarterback and would be playing in his first playoff game. The Bucs have some vets. And again, so this matchup with the Lions and Vikings will be huge. And the winner can not only avoid possibly going and having to play in Tampa, but then going to play in Philadelphia or having to play in LA against the Rams. So instead, the winner gets to play at home for the rest of the playoffs. And so ultimately, if they keep winning, they get to New Orleans for the Super Bowl. So we shall see. But before we move ahead completely to this Lions game, to recap this game against Green Bay, the things I liked, the things I didn't like. The thing I like, obviously, number one is how Sam Darnold played. Another strong showing for Sam Darnold. He finished 33 for 43, so that's highly efficient. 377 yards, which is a career high. 3 touchdowns. He did have a 1 interception, which even before he threw it, I was telling myself, I said, no turnovers here. Just be smart with the football. And that was kind of a bad mistake that he shouldn't have done. Gave the Packers momentum, gave them good field position, and they scored on that drive. And that's what kind of started, that momentum shift that then allowed Green Bay to kind of get back into this game. But other than that, he played pretty much flawless football. The offensive line deserves a lot of credit. The Vikings O-line held up really well. And it's not even about the sacks. If you watch the game, it's just the time that they were able to buy Sam Darnold in the pocket. There were so many plays that I feel like he held on to the football for a while in there and then would, make a play there right before he got hit. And again, so that's credit on the offensive line. And I like the fact that Jalen Naylor had 81 yards, 5 catches receiving, because again, just like when the Vikings played the Bears in Chicago, if you want to shut down Justin Jefferson, the Vikings have so many other weapons at their disposal. And they didn't even shut down Jefferson, but it did seem like Jets had a quiet game. But Jefferson still led the Vikings with 8 catches for 92 yards. But again, if you want to take him away, the Vikings can't beat you with their other weapons. And ultimately, those are the things I like. The things I didn't like, really, is that it's just the way, aside from that one possession where the defense, the Vikings were up pretty good lead, 20-3, and that's when Darnold throws the pick. Again, the defense not for that. They're in a bad spot there. The Packers started with the ball like in the Minnesota 20. So, okay, you give up the score there. Then the Vikings come back with a good drive, take the lead, extend the lead to 27-10, and that's when it seemed pretty much over. That's when I said to myself, okay, this is where this defense that has shown that they are a championship-type defense closes the door here. They either get a strip sack or they get an interception, and it's done. But instead, I think they switched to prevent defense and allowed Green Bay to kind of just get whatever they wanted, dink and dunk here and there, and kind of move the football, and they allowed a touchdown. And then the offense, stalled for the Vikings. And then I'm like, okay, it's 27-18 because the Packers went for two and converted. So I was like, all right, 27-18. Again, time for this defense to just shut the door. Let's not play any games. But no, the Packers again drove right down pretty easily. And I do not like that. Up until that 27-10 point, I was actually feeling like, man, this looks like a Super Bowl team, mostly because the defense looks like a championship defense. And again, if it's just the fact that Brian Flores went to prevent defense a little bit too early, then so be it. Then I'm not as worried because ultimately, come playoff time, you're not going to feel good with the lead no matter how much time is left on the clock. So if he just felt good with the lead and thought that the Packers would waste too much time and he mismanaged that, sure, that's fine. And then I'm not as worried. But if the Packers started figuring something out there, then it kind of worries me a little bit. I would have liked the defense to just kind of close the door there and not have it come down to the offense needing to convert on the third down to then run out the clock. Because if they wouldn't have converted, the Packers, from the way they were playing at that point, I think would have come down the field, hit a field goal, and won the game at the end. So it got pretty close there at the end, and it didn't make me feel good that the Packers were able to move the ball so easily on the Vikings defense there. And the other thing that I guess I didn't like is that if there is one weakness, assuming that the defense just got weak there at the end because they just kind of relaxed and the coaching was less aggressive and more just, hey, no big plays here, let them get chunk yards, but just don't give up the big play. The other concern I have is the running game. The story in the offseason for the Vikings was that they need to have a better running game this season, and they do. Aaron Jones has nearly 1,100 yards rushing this year, so that's a big plus, and they have been running the ball better. But, the team finished with 69 yards rushing. Aaron Jones finished with 12 carries for 47 yards. Cam Akers had 6 carries for 18 yards. So both averaged more than 3 yards a carry. But ultimately, I don't know if they don't run the ball enough or what it is, but I don't feel like they have a running game that they can depend on to close teams out at the end. And I think they still manage to close teams out at the end because KOC is such a great play caller, and they're able to, pass and be creative on offense to still manage to get first downs and use some of the running game here and there. But there's a difference between a team like the Vikings and let's say a team like the Eagles, who can just hand it off 3 straight times to Saquon Barkley and they'll get the first down. And if they don't, obviously they have the tush push with Jalen Hurts or whatever. But even Detroit, obviously more so when they had David Montgomery earlier, but they can depend on their offensive line and run the ball. And the Vikings just really, I don't think can do that, have that capability. So that is a concern I have moving forward. But ultimately, if you're a Viking fan, you got to feel great. You're 14-2. What a season. This is supposed to be a rebuilding year. This was supposed to be a year of, okay, let's see what J.J. McCarthy has got. And Darnold's kind of the placeholder. Once McCarthy gets hurt, you kind of thinking to yourself like, man, this season is going to stink. Because even if, let's say, Darnold doesn't play well, we don't even have anything exciting like a rookie quarterback to watch play, like at least the Falcons maybe have now with Penix, that they can get excited about seeing him play. And so once McCarthy got hurt, it seemed very dim, and it seemed like it was going to be just a tough season. But Darnold, man, he has been great. And with every week that goes by, again, I think they should franchise tag him. I've said that. Buys you another year to evaluate J.J. McCarthy and another year to see if this is sustainable with Darnold. And if it is, then, hey, he's your QB of the future. He's only 27 years old right now. And ultimately, if this is what JJ McCarthy plays like at 27 years old, so 4 seasons from now, you'd be happy. This is MVP level type stuff. So again, if you have it already and he's got it, why do you move on from him? It's tough. I know as a Viking fan that, you drafted JJ McCarthy and we want him to be the guy, but sometimes if it's there and it's happening, it's football. It's what are you doing for me now? So I say you franchise tag him, give yourself another season, and then see what happens. And if Darnold ends up playing just as well or better next year, and he becomes your QB1 of the future, and you extend him, you still will have value for McCarthy next offseason. You don't have to trade him this offseason. So let the kid sit another year, franchise tag Darnold. But before we go to that, they got to play the Lions. Tough matchup. I don't know how I feel about this. Obviously, I want to separate my fandom and try to be unbiased here, but I do feel like the Vikings are carrying this momentum. They're playing good football. Even today, going into this game, I didn't feel like the moment was going to be too big for Sam Darnold. I felt like he was going to play a solid game, if not a pretty good game, which is what he's been doing all year. So I just don't feel like he's going to lose them the game and go out there and throw for less than 150 yards and have 3 picks or something like that. He did have his struggles in some games this year, like the Jaguars game this year. It was a struggle, but that's really the only game where it was a complete stinker. And I just don't feel like that's the type of game that we're going to get from him. But hey, you never know. This is why this is how football goes. And I think it's going to be a great matchup. Detroit still has to play tomorrow. So for them, they're going to have a short week essentially prepping for this game. So we shall see, but I think it'll be a great matchup. Again, I'm a Vikings fan, so take it with a grain of salt, but I do think that they're carrying this momentum. We'll see how the Detroit game plays out tomorrow. Kind of a tricky spot for them. They don't really have much to play for tomorrow. If they lose to the 49ers, sure, they're technically second in the division behind the Vikings, but if they win and beat the Vikings, they'll jump back up to first. So it's kind of a meaningless game for them against the Niners, because even if they win, same thing, they're just tied with the Vikings and have to wait till next Sunday. And if they lose that game, then the Vikings would win the division. So tough spot for Detroit. We'll see how they manage that, if they rest some guys here and there. So ultimately, it comes down to, Sunday Night Football, last game of the season in Detroit, Vikings-Lions for the division title, for the number 1 seed in the NFC, which is huge. And I think both teams are going to be desperate for that, because if the Lions can get the number 1 seed and, run through Detroit for the playoffs, not only is that huge for their home field advantage, but it's also huge because they are so banged up. I certainly don't feel bad for them because they're a divisional rival, but if they weren't a divisional rival, it's a team you would feel bad for, because this is their Super Bowl window right now. Most of their players right now are hitting their prime or in their prime. And so to have that many guys hurt is tough, but that's just the way, football goes sometimes. So again, as a division rival, I don't feel sorry for them, but that would be huge for them to get home field throughout the playoffs. Whereas for the Vikings, hey, you get to play at home in one of the best stadiums in the whole NFL with, that home field advantage and how loud it gets there and everything. And then at that point, you would be just 2 wins away from the Super Bowl appearance. So that's crazy. So we shall see. Before getting too far ahead, I should stop talking now because I could keep talking about this Viking team forever. But we'll see how it all plays out. My biggest fear in the NFC is the Philadelphia Eagles. Just being honest, as a Vikes fan, I think that they present a tough matchup for Minnesota. But hopefully we don't see them. And if we do end up seeing them, hopefully it's in the NFC Championship game and anything can happen. Skol Vikes. Hope they get this win in Week 18. And I will try to recap that game as well and get us prepared for the playoffs, baby. At least we're in the playoffs. Rebuilding season, nah. Let's go for the number 1 seed. Let's try to get home field advantage. So, Skol Vikes.